Our next webinar is Top Tips to Make Your Digital Marketing Be More Inclusive from Ellie Thompson, Disability Services and Social Media Coordinator at Diversity and Ability. In this session, Ellie will be taking you through to be more inclusive in your marketing. The session will be focusing on social media and the quick wins your charity can achieve to transform the accessibility of your digital content. Ellie will give you some useful tips and tricks when it comes to creating inclusive digital content. This will include an accessibility checklist for charities and a rundown of the different inclusive practices across the main social media channels. You'll learn how you can quickly adapt your posts to be more inclusive by following simple steps. Ellie also will be explaining what we mean by the term inclusive marketing and running you through the general principles within this. Again, we will be having a Q&A at the end, so please start submitting your questions by clicking on the button that looks like the two overlapping text boxes, usually at the bottom right of your display. Also, you can put a like next to the questions that you'd like to vote for, as you have been doing in the previous session. And please feel free to let us know what your thoughts are. Share your experiences in the chat, your comments, your opinions with us all. And let's get started with our top tips.
Hi everyone, so my name's Ellie and I'm really excited to be joining you all today to discuss inclusive and accessible communications. I'm really excited to be part of the conference alongside such a great roster of speakers as well, and to be sharing with you all the things you can do to make sure that your communications and marketing are as inclusive and accessible as possible. So first off, a little bit more about me. So as I said, I'm Ellie, and I'm the Communications Officer at Diversity and Ability. So we're a disabled-led social enterprise that supports individuals and organisations to be inclusive, to feel supported, and to really thrive in their own way as well. And I've been working for DNA for about 1.5 years now, and before that I was working at an education charity as well, so supporting young people from underrepresented backgrounds. I'm also disabled and neurodiverse myself, so that's why communications that are accessible and inclusive are such a big passion of mine, and why I'm so happy to be able to share that with you all today. I'd love to know who's come along today, so if you could share a little bit about yourself in the chat, so your name, kind of where you've come from, and also if there's anything that you have in terms of expectations for the session, any aims you have, any questions you want answered, just a kind of general, what are you hoping to get out of the session? Share that in the chat as well, and I'll be keeping an eye out and responding to you all as we go along too. So I thought I'd start just by giving you a bit of an overview into what we'll be discussing today. So firstly, we're going to talk about why #Be More Inclusive. Why does this need to be done? So I'm going to show you kind of what we mean even by inclusive communications, and then talk you through the kind of steps that you can make sure that you're kind of hitting the targets and that you are including everyone. Once I've established that we're doing it for a reason and that it is important, I'll move on to talking about how you can make that possible for your organisation and for your communications. So we'll start off by talking about visual accessibility, so everything about the look and feel of your content. And then we'll move on to audio accessibility. And then we'll cover all the general principles to make sure that you're really including everyone. After that, I'm really excited that we've got a lot of time for questions, so we can have a group discussion and make this as collaborative as possible, so I can hear from you all and answer any questions that anyone has. So firstly, why do you think we need to be more inclusive? So if you just start by writing down in the chat why you think this is necessary. I'll give everyone a few seconds to write something down, and I'll be keeping an eye out for responses. So yeah, I think a really good way of thinking about why we need to be inclusive is to think of who we might be accidentally excluding by the way we make our posts at the moment, or the way we communicate with people. So for example, think of how a blind or vision impaired or sight impaired person would access your Instagram posts. Now, they can't see images necessarily, so how would they be able to access that content? And there is a way they can have the content of the image read out to them. What would that sound like for them though? What about for deaf or hard of hearing people? How would they be able to access your videos, your live content, any podcasts, or even virtual events? So those are the kind of people and the kind of communities that we need to be thinking about. And basically, inclusive communications means just that. It means that everyone is able to access your communications content. And it means really considering a truly diverse audience. Personally, I think this is something that's really important for everyone, from your kind of personal Twitter page to your organization's LinkedIn. But I do think it's especially important for people like us in a way. I think a lot of us come from kind of a charity or a social enterprise background and might be actively trying to reach out to people from a community that's been excluded or that isn't able to access posts in the way other people do. So by not including everyone in our social media content, we're potentially missing out on some of the people who would benefit most from what we're providing. So that's why I think it's especially important for people like us to consider. So what can we actually do? The good thing about it is we can make a lot of difference in some incredibly simple steps. So that's what I'm here to tell you. I'm here to break down the kind of real quick fixes to make your communications and marketing inclusive to everyone. So as I said, we're first going to think about visual accessibility. So this is an example post. It's pretty plain, but we're going to work it up a little bit. So firstly, if you could write in the chat anything you noticed that we could change to make this post more accessible. So what's your kind of initial impression? So the first thing we're going to think about is high contrast in terms of colors. So again, that's just a really quick and simple thing to change. So the post on the left, you can see is kind of really, there's not much contrast between the two colors, the writing and the background, whereas the post on the right, everything stands out a little bit better because of that contrast. This is something that's really important for dyslexic people or other neurodiverse people because it makes the content more visually accessible. It means that they're able to read it. Also for people with limited sight who are sight impaired, the image on the left may just look like a grey square, whereas on the right, they'll see that there's text involved. We're going to make a further change though, and we're going to add accessible fonts. So the post on the left has kind of got like a handwritten style, again in that white text, but what we need to do is make sure that the fonts we're using are sans serif, that means evenly spaced, and we want to be using a font size of 12 points or larger. And really actually kind of like the bigger the better. And so for presentations, aim for 18 point or larger, I'd say. And just basically, the larger you can get that text, the more people are going to be able to read and access that. Just to add in as a general point as well, where you can, avoid images of text. It's better to write the text into the content kind of as it is rather than make it an image. For example, for people who are using a zoom or a magnifier tool on their phone or computer, images of text become really pixelated when you zoom them. So that's another thing where it's just not going to be legible to someone who's using a magnifier tool. So where you can use text, obviously with things like Instagram, Twitter, we know that images of text can be really important, but just bear that in mind and think when you can use an alternative. Finally, we're going to make a clear order to the content as well. So just imagine that your content is in the same kind of style and linear structure as it would be if you were reading a document or an article, a guide, anything really. Numbers and lists are especially great so that there is a really clear order. And that means for neurodiverse people that they know what to read next and where to kind of go. And also for anyone who's using a screen reader that reads out the content of an image, it will read it out in the order that we want it to be read out. So that's another really quick and easy fix to make sure that we're communicating in the best way for everyone. So the next thing to think about in terms of visual accessibility is image descriptions. You may already know about image descriptions or be using them, but just as a general overview, image descriptions are primarily for people who are vision impaired or blind, and they describe the content of an image. Aside from that, they're also really beneficial for a lot of neurodiverse people. For example, if you have a processing difference, so you might understand things slower or at a different pace to other people, or you might read images in a sense in a different way, and that will mean that you interpret it differently to how it was intended by the original poster. So all of those people will really benefit from image descriptions. So here's a little bit of information about kind of how to write an image description. So firstly, you want to make sure they're really clear and neat, and that they are descriptive, that they're really enhancing the content of the image and going through everything that's involved in that content. I know it can be a little bit overwhelming when you're looking at an image to think of how you could possibly encapsulate all of that in one image description. So a really good way to think about it is to use the formula object, action, context. So by that I mean start with the focus of the image, the object, describe that first, then describe the action, so what is happening in the image, and then move on to the context, the surrounding environment. And then really what that does is it mirrors the way that those of us who are sighted look at an image. We see the most important thing first, the object. We then look at how it's interacting with its surroundings, and then we examine the context. So that's a good way to kind of replicate that. Image descriptions also vary depending on the platform. So really keep in mind the purpose of the image in its context. So I know that on Twitter, obviously we're writing in a very short form way. So your image descriptions may echo that and be a little bit shorter, very concise and to the point. Instagram, on the other hand, is a platform that's designed to be visual, and it's designed to be image focused. So we want to echo that in our image descriptions. We want to make them a little bit more descriptive and making sure that we're really encompassing everything that we're hoping sighted people will see in the image too. A really quick fix is to make sure that you're avoiding words related to sight in your image description. And by that, I'm writing an image description. It can be really tempting and really easy to fall into the trap of writing things like, in the distance, you can see the sea, or a tree is visible. So that kind of language, when read out to a sight impaired person using a screen reader, is just really jarring. It doesn't make them feel included. And that's a really quick and easy thing you can remove to make sure that everyone's able to feel included by that image. Next, we're going to think about describing facial expressions. So obviously, those are really important to the context of the post. So make sure that you're capturing what the person is feeling, what they're saying with the way their face looks as well. That's also another thing that's really important for people with processing differences who may not recognize that the person is meant to be showing that they're feeling happy or sad or focused or whatever. And finally, this is really important because we want our images to be diverse and representative. So if you know the race and or the gender of the person who's in your image, include that in the image description. So for example, you would say a white woman or a brown man, but we should only do that if we know their gender. Definitely don't assume. So for example, if you don't know their gender, just make sure you say a person is in the focus of the image. If you don't know the race as well, make the terms neutral. You can say things like a white appearing person, so you avoid kind of identifiers to someone that you don't actually know for sure. So next, we're going to talk about audio accessibility. So if you're producing kind of content where the audio is key, how can you make sure that that's accessible for everyone? So firstly, if you're producing podcasts for your communications or marketing, make sure that you provide a transcript, so a written recording of everything that's said in the podcast. And there's software out there that will transcribe that material for you. For example, Otter is a really good example. If you just input your audio file, it will write the transcript out for you. This also has a hidden benefit of really helping in terms of things like search engine optimization, because every keyword that your speakers say in your podcast is written down. So it's really a win-win on that one. The video content, you need to be providing closed captions. So what that means is captioning or subtitles for all of the posts or videos that also include any necessary contextual sounds. So a slamming door or background music. The best thing to do for organisations like us, where we may have limited resources, is to take advantage of auto closed captions on things like YouTube and Instagram TV. Both of those you can set up to automatically add the transcript and add those closed captions. That's really helpful. Another quick tip for making sure that the audio is accessible for everyone is to really keep background noise to a minimum. So I'd really think about whether the music that you might have added in the background of your video is going to make it confusing for someone who might have differences in their sensory processing. Is it going to mean that they can't understand or hear the content that people are saying, which is really the most important thing. Make sure that, I know we're all working remotely at the moment, making sure that your kind of microphone is able to be clear so that people who have limited hearing, who are hard of hearing, or have auditory processing differences can really capture what's important and get what you want them to get out of the audio content. So that's kind of a brief introduction to audio accessibility. I wanted to touch on inclusive language because this is something that's so important. And actually, this is one of the things that can feel the most exclusive if it's not done correctly. So we want to make sure that we're including people and speaking about them in the way that they want to be spoken about. So the first kind of guidelines in terms of like personal language, tone of voice, not shouting, are all things that mirror the standard communications guidelines. You probably already know the tone of voice for your organisation. So it's just a case of not changing that. You don't need to be talking down to disabled people or talking to them in a different way. Just keep the tone of voice normal. Also making sure that you're using the language that's best. So disabled people rather than people with disabilities or the disabled. Using positive language. So moving on from phrases like suffers from and using just has instead. So someone doesn't suffer from cerebral palsy, they have cerebral palsy. Removing slurs from your language. So everyday words that actually have a really difficult history to them and come with a lot of discrimination and a lot of weight for disabled and neurodiverse people. That includes things like crazy, lame, insane. Really think about the words you're using because you never know who's going to be affected by those words. Actually, a really good guideline for this is the government's own inclusive communications guidelines. So they have a guideline which talks you through the best ways of referring to disabled people with lots of specific examples as well. So if you just search government inclusive communications, that should bring that up, and it's a really good way to start. This is one of my favorites because it's one of the easiest switches you can make, and that's something called Camelcase. So if you have a look at the top versus the bottom kind of set of hashtags, there really isn't much of a difference there, except with Camelcase, the first letter of each word is capitalized. So firstly, that means neurodiverse people are able to read the material. So your brain kind of, it's much easier for your brain to identify that this first phrase says diversity and inclusion, not yand or din or whatever, because the words are all merged together. Also for people who use screen readers, so a kind of text-to-speech software where the information that you're reading is read out to you. A screen reader might not necessarily make sense of these in the way that we want it to. A really good example I've seen recently is that hashtag Black Lives Matter is read out by screen reader as Black Lives Matter. It's just harder to understand and it really takes the context away. It's just a little bit jarring for anyone who relies on a screen reader. And also make sure that when you are writing your hashtags, you always put them at the end of your posts so that for people with a screen reader, it's not kind of peppered throughout and really kind of sullying the information that they're hearing through their headphones. It just makes everything nice and clear and makes it much more likely that they will be able to engage with your posts. again, this is a really simple one. And this is just about making link text descriptive. So have a look at these two examples. And if we say this is option 1 and this is option 2, just write in the chat which one you think is the more accessible one. Maybe it's an easy question, maybe it isn't. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. So the answer is number 2, this is much more accessible. In general, you want to avoid saying click here. When you write a descriptive link, you're adding context and clarity, and you're informing your audience rather than placing them on the back foot. Also, with a screen reader, the word link will be read out after the linked text. So this one would read, click here, link to read about our company. This one would read, to learn more about our company, read about us, link. The second one's much clearer in terms of what the link you're clicking on is going to take you to. Also make sure it's a high color contrast. So just going back to that original point, we want the link to really stand out on the page so that for people who are reading it and using visual cues, they can see that that's the link that they need to click on. And then also even the word click can be quite excluding, because a lot of us don't click. Anyone who's using a screen reader or a kind of speech to text software, they're not manually clicking links. A lot of us using our phones, we're not manually clicking links, we're tapping things. So it's just kind of old language now that we can move on from. Again, there's a hidden benefit to that in that posts that have a descriptive link text are much more clicked on than anything that just says click here or read more. So it has a real communications and marketing kind of positive side effect in that it makes people more likely to click on your links or tap through to your links or follow your links, regardless of whether they need those extra accessibility steps. So the next point I really want to focus on is emoji. And it's really important to use emoji sparingly. So this isn't a case of avoiding them entirely, just limiting them. And because every emoji will be read out by a screen reader. So consider what it would sound like if you had your post in front of you and you had to read the words that were behind each emoji in your post. So obviously this was a bit of a trend a while back to have the clapping hands emoji in between each post. And I've got an example of what that sounded like for someone using a screen reader. So I'll just play that for you so you can see just how inaccessible it is. Or will I? Okay, so it looks like the video isn't going to work. I'm really sorry about that. But basically you can see here in the picture, the clapping hand emoji is throughout. And I'll do a little demonstration of what that would have sounded like, which is tweets, clapping hand emoji, written clapping hand emoji, like clapping hand emoji, this clapping hand emoji, clapping hand emoji, not clapping hand emoji, accessible clapping hand emoji. So you can see it's really hard to understand even what I'm saying. It also sounds really annoying, like I'm very aware saying it all to you, how irritating that is to listen to. And if you imagine kind of scrolling down your Twitter when this was a trend and seeing that over and over again and having to listen to that clapping hand emoji over and over again. So it's just a really simple thing. Really think about what your emojis would sound like in your tweets or your social media content. So the last thing I really want to touch on is representation. So think about who and what you're featuring in your content. So this is, again, something that I feel like is absolutely vital for everyone, especially important for organizations like us, who are really focused on making ourselves accessible and including people. Like that's so much of our kind of purpose and reason for being. So really think about who and what you're featuring in that content. And when we say inspiration porn, that may be a term you've come across before, it might not. But basically that means that something a disabled person has done is inspirational just because they're disabled. So for example, wow, you're raising a child and you have a chronic illness, that's so inspiring. Or wow, you're exercising even though you're a wheelchair user, I'm so inspired, like I have no excuse now. That kind of language is really patronizing, it can feel really othering. And it's basically the opposite of what we're trying to do, in that it's really exclusionary instead of including people. So the key really is to just use the voices of those you're referring to. I've already given you some really kind of good starting points in terms of the inclusive language that you're using, but think beyond that to who you can ask to contribute, who you can be listening to when you're creating communications and marketing material. And also just kind of making sure that everything is visually representative as well. So even the stock images that you use or the graphics that you make sure they're diverse too. There are some really good resources out there of free, like royalty-free stock images and illustrations that are properly diverse. And my favorite is called Disabled and Here. It's by an organization called Affect the Verb. And they have a series of photos of people of colour and disabled people, kind of in their homes, at work, in their social lives, just kind of living their lives. And it's a really good way to make sure that your Instagram doesn't just look white and doesn't just look non-disabled, and that you are kind of representing a wide range of people. Another really good example is called Humans, but with 3 A's, so humans, I guess it's pronounced. And that is an illustration kind of program that you can download really easily. And you can make your own little illustrations that are really diverse in terms of whether they have kind of mobility aids, whether they're wheelchair users, their colour of their skin, their gender, just make it as diverse as possible. And that really, again, just make sure that you're including everyone. And obviously use that in tandem with the image descriptions, but then highlight that these posts are representative too. So that's pretty much it. Those are your quick tips, and those are your really easy fixes to make sure that your social media content and your communications and marketing are including everyone. Hopefully I've shown you not just why that's so valuable, but how easy a switch it is to make, and the real benefits that will come with that in terms of reaching the people who are most going to benefit from your content. I would really love to spend some time answering any questions. So we'll move into a Q&A now, and I'm really looking forward to discussing it with you all further.
Thank you, Ellie. Another fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. I learned a lot there. Like Ellie has said, it is time for Q&A. We've got quite a few questions coming in already, so keep submitting your questions in the Q&A as well. It's great to see you all engaging with us and engaging with each other. Just to read all your experiences in the chat. Thank you for sharing links. Thank you for advice. Thank you for all of those comments on font and colours and backgrounds. And we also do have a question from Emma on this, so maybe we need to spend a little bit of time to glean from your experience on that, Ellie. So welcome. Shall we make a start on the questions? And let's move over. Obviously we've got the top one, which I just said from Emma. What are the good fonts and the bad ones?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm pleased I get to answer it and explore it a little more. So the real key first step is to think about sans serif and serif fonts. If you don't know what that means, sans serif is something like Comic Sans versus serif, which is something like Times New Roman. And what serif means is it's got the little kind of dashes and lines in addition to each letter as a kind of decorative function. Just think of a very old book, how that would be written. So in terms of bad fonts, that's what you're looking to avoid, something like Times New Roman. And also, as we had in the video, anything that's in script, so anything that's replicating a kind of handwritten cursive style. The best font, in my experience, is called Dyslexie, and it's a font that you can access yourself, which is specifically designed to be accessible to neurodiverse people. But aside from that, anything that is sans serif, so that could be Arial, Verdana, Calibri, Open Sans, any of those kind of body of fonts will make your post instantly more accessible.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I hope that's answered the question for Emma there. And we've got a question up at the top, which has been voted for all of the persons from Caitlin. All of the persons I have worked with request people first language. So why not people with disabilities, as this puts the person first?
Yeah, so this is actually kind of, I guess, a bit of a debate even within the disability community. So my organisation and myself personally use the identity first language. So I am a disabled person, for example. And the reason we do that is based on the social model of disability. So social model of disability, meaning that we don't think we are disabled by a deficit or kind of an issue with ourselves. We're disabled by a disabling environment that we live in, by access barriers, by the way that society has kind of formed to be only accessible to a specific group of people. So that's one of the main reasons we use disabled. Another really important reason is because for a lot of disabled people, being disabled is a key part of our identity. So I've seen Kathy in the chat has just written about autistic people preferring identity first language.
Yes.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case, Kathy, and also the deaf community, often deaf people with a capital D, because they have their culture and community, they don't see themselves as someone living with deafness or suffering from this. It's different, but I saw there was another question about this as well, and this is different in the US. So in the US, there's a different kind of model and understanding of disability as a whole, which is people with disabilities, and that's based on the kind of dichotomy between disabled people and able-bodied people. The key, as is clear in that question, I think, is always just to ask the person what they prefer. But as a general rule, especially if you're in the UK, disabled people is kind of the way forward in terms of being inclusive in the way we speak about the people we're working with.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? That question was from Emily from the US. So I guess culturally, looking at different countries, then yes, then different standards apply, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, very, very tricky one. We have another question, and it's from Ellie, who says, where do image descriptions go in the post?
Another really good question. I was watching myself, speaking back, and I knew that I should have highlighted this. So there's two kind of functions. So firstly, alt text, which is the kind of inbuilt screen reader accessible software, and that goes almost kind of behind each post. So if you look on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, you can write in an alt text description. I've actually got a guide to how to do this, which I can post in the chat or send over later, because it's really useful just to know where you're looking for. Image descriptions separately can also go in the body of the post. And one thing that I really passionately believe is you should be doing both alt text, kind of built-in functionality, and writing your image descriptions in the post, because not everyone that uses a not only people who use a screen reader benefit from image descriptions. I mean, it's also a really nice way to be very visibly accessible and encourage other people to start using image descriptions too.
So does that sort of answer the second question from Jill about the image description, the alt text be the same?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of the difference. The alt text is the real accessible kind of logistical side, and image descriptions is more about kind of describing the post, and you want to include that in the caption of the post.
Okay, yeah, that's good. We've got a really good one actually here from Claire, and she's saying, is there a good screen reader software app we could download? I know there's loads out there, aren't there? And we could try out for ourselves. It may be the best way to understand the experience, but I also understand they're expensive, some of them, are they not?
Yeah, they are, and there's lots of ways that people may access them. So kind of through like an access to work, so they can use it at the workplace, or disabled students allowance if they're a student, so they can access it through their education. But in terms of how you can replicate that experience, really the easiest thing to do is all phones, laptops have built-in voiceover functionality. So if you go to the accessibility section, settings of either your phone or your laptop, you'll be able to turn that on and you'll be able to experience kind of how it works. There's also some really great videos out there of people demonstrating how their voiceover software works for them. And you will see the difference, because people who use voiceover software know 100% what they're doing, can do everything really quickly, speedily, efficiently. If you try using voiceover software for the first time, it will be an absolute mess. I know it was for me. So I would recommend trying both of those.
I know we've got some comments there in the chat. I don't know if you'll be able to see that, Ellie, that we've got, I use Dragon and it's a good screen reader. And
yeah.
Would you personally have any recommendations?
So Dragon is great. It's also got what's called speech to text functionality. So one of the main benefits of Dragon is that you'll be able to voice command your computer to do pretty much anything you want. It is expensive, but if you are in the UK and you're working and you think that actually screen reading is something that's going to benefit you, then you should apply for the government grant for access to work support.
Okay.
We've got some information about that on our website as well, just like a free video for anyone to watch to find out more. But you can also get a program called JAWS. So that again is you can download it and it reads out everything. So that's more of like the real inbuilt screen reader software. JAWS you do have to pay for, but there is a free trial. So you can give it a go kind of if you're just more looking to kind of explore it.
Okay, fantastic. Let's move over to another question. We've got some time here from David. Can you give tips about how to painlessly include accurate subtitling with videos? Oh yeah, can you please?
I can try my best.
Yes.
So as I said in the video, because I think what's really important context for this is recognizing the organizations that we work for, the capacity that we have kind of as charities and social enterprises. For the most part, we have limited capacity. We can't kind of employ someone who's going to sit through and painstakingly transcribe every piece of voice kind of or audio content that we create. So my key really is to focus on Otter, which I mentioned in the video. It's called Otter AI. You can get some free content through that. And then also there is a subscription service where you can record longer than 40 minutes transcript. And the transcript is very accurate. And it even distinguishes between people. So it will say person one speaking, person two. What I'd recommend most in terms of making it accessible for us as well and our capacity is to use Otter and create that transcript. And if you're creating a video, copy that transcript into the YouTube closed caption system and assign the timings. And what it will do is automatically place your subtitles throughout your video. And that's kind of the best way to make it possible. The other pain-free tip, which is of limited use, is just to try and make your audio as clear as possible in the first place. So really think about that background noise. I know we're all doing the best we can, kind of especially over Zoom. Even my video was a little crackly there. So, but try and remember you're making your own job easier if you really focus on the audio at that very beginning point when you're recording it in the first place.
Yeah, I know we had quite a few comments on the background noise, didn't we, in the chat there? So yeah, that is a very, very important issue there, definitely. Okay, let's move over to a question. We've got a couple more minutes. A question with Kenny, who says, how does this correlate with digital poverty and digital divide, having limited access to technology?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. The thing is, so accessibility tips and kind of things like that are going to really help with digital inclusion as well, because we know that at least in the UK, the majority of there's a very high proportion of, for example, people living with homelessness who are also neurodiverse, who may have a diagnosis or may not have a diagnosis, but would benefit from these accessibility tips that we're talking about. There's definitely this bigger issue in terms of digital inclusion, but I guess where we're coming from is kind of, we acknowledge that everything's moved online, that you have to be able to function online in order to get access to kind of benefits and housing and food and work and everything. So it's just acknowledging that that's where we are and trying to meet the accessibility standards that will at least make that more accessible. So, and I wish I could solve that, and we do a lot of anti-poverty work, so hopefully we're getting there, and that the pandemic has kind of catalyzed that a little bit, but yeah, definitely this is really important for digital accessibility and inclusion.
Okay, well, thank you. Unfortunately, we've got to sort of wrap up the questions and answers for this session, but please, thank you so much, Ellie. Thank you for taking your time to answer those challenging questions as well. Thank you to everyone for attending, for listening, for participating, for letting us know where you're from as well. And we're going to take a short break. You can join Ellie, please, in Remo for extended Q&A, or you can network with your peers in Remo, or you can enjoy another one of our energizers that we're running throughout the day. And this gives you just a break from the learning. And so grab those refreshments, relax, and enjoy our breathing exercise, which is from salesforce.org, followed by music from our very own Nick Wyatt. Thank you.